Hey everyone, Spaceman Spiff here, hot off a top 8 finish in the Carta Magica Provisional Showdown. Took a little break from doing the Crimson Rampage reveal videos to do some provisional testing, but I'll be getting back to those right after this one. It's been so long since I've participated in such a big weekend-long event, and even though webcam isn't the ideal format, I had a blast. So many great players out there, everyone having fun. I got to talk up with a bunch of really cool people in between rounds, and the format was super diverse, even if the top 4 wasn't. As I mentioned, I did a lot of testing leading up to this with my buddy Smooth over on Discord, and I made some changes to my Jiro list that I wanted to share. And then after that, I figured I'd go over a real quick rundown of my tournament experience. So here's the updated list. As you can see, I've made some pretty significant tweaks for what I expected to face in the tournament, but the overall deck works the same way. It's all about getting 1 or 2 momentum and then stringing out 4 to 6 attacks for a turn 2 kill. And this version is a huge step up in explosiveness from the last. I wish I'd kept track, but if I had to guess, I'd say at least half of my wins were turn 2 kills. We have a pretty minor change to the foundation base to start. First day of class was something I was testing, and it looked good on paper, but in practice, I was never really that happy with it. It's just so rare that the +2 check is relevant, and Jiro has so many ways to mitigate bad checks already, and my attacks are already super low to the ground, so the only time I ever even bothered to use it was when I played 2 0 grav lifts in a row, which is pretty uncommon. If you could use it on attacks other than your second, I'd be into this card, but that would be way too strong probably, and not what we have, so I cut them to finish the playset of latent skill. I just always found myself hoping to see this card in my opening hand, and with 4 copies, now I do. It's a small change, but this made a huge impact, I think. Next up, we have some pretty major changes to my attack package. I decided to ditch all 4 copies of Amplified Sound Blast in favor of 2 Electric Jolts and my 3rd Home Run Comet and Instant Explosive Release. This was a bit of a meta call more than anything, to be honest. Amplified Sound Blast is really good against Kirishima, but Electric Jolt is really good against Coordinated Effort, and Kirishima isn't the only one taking advantage of that card. All Might 3, Void Eraser, and All Might True Form all take advantage of Coordinated Effort, and it really makes blocking hard. Jolt lets me tap it down on their turn, which puts them down 1 foundation, but then if they want to go in, they have to commit more while I get to block like normal. Coincidentally, Jolt also brought me to 5 copies of a card that dealt guaranteed damage, letting me play an additional Instant Explosive Release, and this is by far my favorite change. Jolt or Throw into Instant Explosive Release, backed up by all the card draw this deck has, can make for some really insane turn 2 strings. It also made me really noticeable difference in how often I was able to untap my Amphibious Foundations, to the point that I'm actually considering adding a 3rd. I also added a 3rd Home Run Comet to make sure I was seeing at least 1 per game. Lastly, we have the Sideboard Changes. Explosive Pride is a card that looked like it would deal with some decks on paper, but it never really synergized with what the rest of the deck was trying to do, so I rarely brought it in. I still wanted access to extra flash attacks, so Amplified Sound Blast got put in the board for Kirishima, Eraser, and Kamui matchups. I also brought in the 3rd Jolt against Coordinated Effort decks, and removed 1 Encouraging Training Partner to make room. The Home Run Comet was just moved to the main deck, with the 4th copy still in here to come in against decks that are just really bad at blocking. And now, here are the matchups I played against on day 1. Round 1, I got it 2-0 versus Sue. It was an absolute aggro fest, both games ending on turn 2, and we were the first ones done in less than 15 minutes. The thing with Sue is she's so squishy. If you're on the play, she's absolutely dead on turn 2. And on the draw, it's a bit trickier, but with 27 health, if you can keep all the right blocks up, you can get her on the crackback. My opponent Blaff was an absolute bro that almost made it into top 16 with a 5-3 finish. That dude was really cool. Round 2, I played against Kirishima. I really like my Kirishima matchup, and we made it to game 3 before my mic went out, and like an idiot, I left the chat and hopped back in, hoping it would solve it. Automatic game loss like a goober. My main sideboard plan against Kirishimas for this tournament was to take out 2 Unwavering Slashes and an Earphone Jack to add in the 3 Amplified Sound Blasts. Worked well against Void Kirishima, but I still walked away with my first loss. Rounds 3 and 4, I played against 2 more Sue decks. I went 2-1 and 2-0 respectively, and didn't change anything from my strategy against her in the first round. Of the 3 Sues I faced, 2 were life and 1 was water. The life decks were very scary and strung out really well, while the water deck played defense better. But using the Todoroki ranged package can backfire when your attacks get drawn in the wrong order, and I think my opponent just didn't draw well. I think life is currently stronger for what it's worth, but the water deck pilot played a solid defense. Round 5 was my first time ever playing against Ochako 2. I didn't focus on her at all in my testing, and paid for it in Game 1 by letting my guard down and getting smacked about the head and shoulders by some real big attacks. My opponent played real well on the death symbol, but Ochako suffers from five-hander syndrome pretty bad if you can actually block her, so I focused more on defense for my other two games and chipped in till her massive health pool was at a more manageable level before striking her out. Round 6 was the scariest match I played the whole tournament. All Might True Form was not a deck I even knew existed until my buddy played against him earlier in the day. He absolutely annihilated me game 1 to the point I was sitting there thinking it was an unwinnable matchup. I brought in an extra jolt and home run comment for the coordinated and my opponent's lack of high blocks. This paid off as I took the next two games by playing super defensively till the 3 life loss per turn from his character whittled him down a bit. Game 3 ended with me at 6 life, having to fully block all 4 of my opponent's attacks, and I got really lucky that things lined up as they did. I do not think this matchup is in my favor, but I'll be running some tests against this deck to get a better sense of it soon. Round 7 was my last round for the day, as I ended up intentionally drawing in round 8, and I played against Earth Kirishima that sideboarded into Nomu. I killed the Kirishima on turn 2 through a super regen, and Nomu took a few turns of chip damage, but again, jolting the coordinated effort worked well on defense. First round of top 16 was another Ochako 2 piloted by John S., this time on air, but I had a night to get a game plan together. I decided that Ochako 2 is not usually going to be able to kill till turn 3, and so I was going to go all in aggro for the turn 2 kill if at all possible. My draws didn't exactly agree with this plan, so I ended up on the receiving end of a bunch of stun attacks and an indiscriminate shock leaving me at 1, but I was able to get her on the crackback. With my opponent on the play for Game 2, I focused on blocking to deny them the use of their character's ability, and survived long enough to get them with a big home run comment. I really liked John's version of Ochako, especially with the specialized sound waves, though I might be biased there. He played well, and I'm glad he made it into the top 16. Second round of Day 2 had me up against the same Earth Kirishima that I played in round 7 of Day 1. I got Game 1 by getting him to 1 life on turn 2, but Game 2, my opponent played 3 copies of You're So Obvious, and I just couldn't push through all of that hate for my big attacks. He was able to return either the speed or the damage to printed value 3 times. Game 3, I checked a 2 on my first attack, and while I managed to recover a bit, I had lost my tempo entirely. I ended up making a misplay at the very end of a string that could have been lethal by playing an unnecessary mid attack when I knew that my opponent had Breaker 2 mid blocks in this deck. My opponent took advantage of this and swung back for lethal. Overall, these were 3 very tight, close games. I set out with the goal of making top 8, and I hit that mark, so I'm super happy with how everything went. Jiro performed really well, and I had a great time getting to play some relatively high-stakes games. Carta Magica put on a great event. I still think this is a healthy meta, even with all 4 Kirishimas in the top, but I never felt like I didn't have a chance against them. I just think that there were some really talented players that decided to play him. Any one of those top 16 players could have taken the top spot. I really believe that. Shout out to my friends Ray and Joel for testing with me. I really needed that help. Hope to see everyone again at the next Provisional.